If you are ready for the NFL Draft to get underway, then like this video because we all know it's a proven science. Trust the science that the draft is dictated by YouTube commenters. So if you want your guy to get picked, hit that thumbs up button. Coming up on today's show, we're going to break down all of the Atlanta Falcons official pre-draft visits. They get up to 30. Now, these things are very fluid, so depending on the time you're watching this, there might be a new name that pops up, and we are filming this on Friday afternoon before we get out of the Chat Sports studios for the weekend. So if a new name pops up, just bear with us. But let's get started with a big position, and that is the quarterback spot. Anthony Richardson. He's not the only quarterback, though. Will Levis as well have both taken pre-draft visits to Atlanta with the Falcons. If you compare these two quarterbacks just statistically head-to-head from last season, it's pretty funny that when you look at the numbers, just the raw numbers, you don't really think 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Yes, that is top 10 worthy right there. Or 53.8 completion percentage and 2,500 yards. Yeah, get him to Atlanta ASAP. The Falcons, they're just doing their due diligence. The quarterback position is the most important position in all of sports. So every single team should always look at quarterbacks every single draft and see if there is something in a quarterback that other teams aren't noticing and he could be the next big thing for that team. So I'm not panicking. You should not panic. They are not drafting a quarterback, at least in round one. Maybe later on, but I am not a Will Levis or Anthony Richardson fan. How could you? If you watched them play last fall, don't remove that from your brain. They stunk for a lot of last fall. I am not going to buy in on these guys being top 10 picks all of a sudden. So if you're with me, do not panic. If you're against me, well, I hate to break the news to you. I hope/don't think the Atlanta Falcons will go quarterback at number 8. Moving on here, some other big name visits. What about Myles Murphy? Edge rusher out of Clemson. Now, the issue with Murphy has been availability, more Brian Bresee actually. But in his career with Clemson, 35 games, 116 tackles, 36 tackles for loss, and 18.5 sacks. We all know Atlanta needs to add more pass rushers. Myles Murphy is a name to remember. Now, I am curious to see if Atlanta and Terry Fontenot believe, hey, we just added Bud Dupree. We're all set at edge rusher. We're going to wait and see on that one. I hope that's not their train of thought. A bunch of one-year contracts for some veteran defensive ends should not make them feel like they have checked that box moving forward. Moving on to another position. This is wide receiver Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Some NFL GMs and scouts and whatnot believe he is the only receiver worthy of a first-round grade. Now, it is worth saying that there are usually 32 picks in the first round of the NFL Draft. Not all 32 players have first-round grades, as they call it, but there have to be 32 first-round selections, or at least this year, 31. Now, JSN last year, or 2 years ago rather, because he only played in a couple of games last season for the Buckeyes, 1,600 yards and 9 touchdowns. He statistically was better than teammates like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who were both top 15 picks a season ago, and JSN was better than them, at least on paper. So the Atlanta Falcons or whoever could be getting an absolute steal with him, given the way that Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave played last season. So if you're looking at it just from the raw numbers, this could be the guy to go with if you want to give Drake London a player to work with. Now, who do you want the Falcons to take in round one? Be the GM for me and give me your top guy, right? Who is the player that when the tweet goes out or Roger Goodell reads the name is the name you want to hear? Let me know in the comment section below. Another receiver to watch for is TCU wideout Quentin Johnston, originally from Temple, Texas. I hate to be a rain cloud here for Johnston, but I think he's going to be a bust in the NFL. He doesn't have blazing speed over 4.5 40. He's got a case of the dropsies, and he's got awesome yards after catch abilities, but he's also just not an overall every single down receiver. He's a great X receiver, but I've got concerns with speed and drops, and for that reason, I'm out on the Horned Frog. But he definitely has some big playmaking ability. I just don't know how well that will translate to the NFL when he's not going up against Big 12 corners who are the worst corners in college football. Now, as for the defensive side, what about Brian Branch, defensive back out of Alabama? I think he's going to be a safety. I've heard some people think, hey, could this be a corner? So we'll call him a DB for now. But Branch for the Crimson Tide last year, 90 tackles, 14 tackles for loss. Those are defensive lineman type numbers. He always finds himself in the backfield making a play. 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, and 7 pass breakups. He's my number 1 safety. Now, the Falcons have already signed a safety in Jesse Bates, but if they want just best player available, Branch could be a tempting pick. All right, moving on to another edge rusher. This is a local guy, Keion White out of Georgia Tech. Last season for the Yellow Jackets, 54 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, and 17 pass breakups. He could keep his place in downtown Atlanta and just stay put in the Peach State. This is a good second-round target for Atlanta. Way too early for number 8. The only way I see him going to Atlanta in round 1 would involve some sort of trade back. But in the second round, if the Falcons don't go edge rusher at number 8 and they go corner or some other spot or like wide receiver, hey, this could be a really good second-round pick for the Falcons to try and find and build some youth at that edge rusher spot. Another edge rusher to keep an eye on, this one is from the Big Ten. This is Adetomiwa Adebawore, or Tommy Adebawore, as his teammates call him. You're going to hear a ton of great athlete, right? Tons of great draft cliches. He actually is a phenomenal athlete. Northwestern was awful last year. They couldn't even win a game in the United States of America, but he was one of their few bright spots. 38 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. I understand that the productivity might not be there, the production level, but throw the tape on and you could see how with a year of coaching in the NFL, he could be a really good defensive lineman. I'm not quite sure where they would have him in a 3-4 front. That's up to Ryan Nielsen to figure out, but the raw athleticism is very much there for this Wildcat. Another wide receiver that the Falcons have had for a pre-draft visit, Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss. Jonathan Mingo is this year's, hey, I know I haven't played a snap of football in months, but somehow my value has just skyrocketed. 51 grabs last year, 861 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I'm not all that high on Mingo, at least not in the first 2 rounds. Round 3, maybe, but I've just never been a very big Mingo guy, and for whatever reason, he's getting a ton of buzz despite not playing any football in months. We're on to the Baylor defensive tackle, Siaki Ika, the true run stopper. He is a boulder of a human being. What's his role? Put him in the middle of the defensive line and force a guard, a center, and maybe even a tackle to try and stop him. And meanwhile, all of your linebackers are freed up and can get into the backfield and make a tackle for loss. We're going to look at some more pre-draft visits in just a moment, but the NFL Draft, believe it or not, is less than 2 weeks away, but it's not too late to get the official 2023 Falcons Draft hat. So get your own today at chatsports.com/ATL hat. Let's talk about the offensive line now. This is Osiris Torrence. He transferred to Florida from the Ragin' Cajun, if I remember correctly, and he is the best pure guard in this draft class. This would be an excellent fit for Atlanta, especially at that left guard spot. I mean, talk about a Falcons offensive line. Jake Matthews, Osiris Torrence, Dahlman, Lindstrom, McGarry. That's a very good front 5 for Atlanta. He's too rich at 8. You just don't see offensive guards go that early because when you're sandwiched in between a tackle and center, there's a bit of a lack of disparity between the 10th best guard in football and like the 50th best. Unless you're like a Quentin Nelson from Notre Dame a couple years ago or a Zach Martin, there just doesn't seem to be a big market for guards early on. But at pick 44, if he's not there, yeah, I like it. All right, this is Derek Hall next up, keeping it in the SEC out of Auburn. He has a really interesting, I'll put it this way. When ESPN finds out about his upbringing and his story before the draft, they're going to lose it. All right, moving on now. Keaton Mitchell, running back from East Carolina. We'll lump in Tyjae Spears out of Tulane. He has been the Cinderella, if you will, since the college football season ended, and he capped it off very nicely in the Cotton Bowl. Now, comparing these two guys head to head, very productive players for their respective schools. 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns for Mitchell over at ECU. Meanwhile, Spears, 1,500 yards and 19 touchdowns. Both guys averaging just about 7 yards a pop. They are big playmaking machines. Might not be the best 3-down backs, and that's why they're not projected to be first or second round players, but they still could be very fun draft picks in rounds 3 or 4. Now, one draft sleeper that everyone is talking about is Jaden Reed out of Michigan State, the wide receiver. He does a lot of things really well, and that's why an NFL team might fall in love with him without a true Achilles heel in his bag. So be honest with me, though. Do you trust in Terry Fontenot's vision for the Falcons? Is Fontenot the right driver behind the wheel? Give me a T for trust or an N for no trust in good old Terry. Another wide receiver to look at is Trey Palmer. Nebraska was not even worthy of getting color television rights last season, but Palmer was very good for the Cornhuskers, over 1,000 yards. Let's lump in Rashee Rice, another wideout out of SMU. Are you noticing a trend here? The Falcons are doing their homework on some round 2, round 3 wide receivers. Now, here are the stats for these 3 guys from last season. You see Rashee Rice, 96 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 10 touchdowns. The guy is a track star. Now, as for the tight end spot here, this is Sam Laporta out of Iowa. So Laporta is one of the 5 best tight ends in this draft class here. He could be a really nice early day 3 pick. At the same time, it feels a little bit like, do you really want to go tight end in day 2 after using the 4th overall pick in tight end not too long ago? I would wonder if this would be a wise pick for the Falcons. Now, the Iowa Hawkeye had 58 grabs last season, 657 yards and 1 touchdown. We know that college football is not designed to make tight ends look good, right? It is either run the football in the Big Ten or 4 verts, and we are going West Coast style in the SEC. Neither of those systems benefit tight ends all that much, so you don't find a ton of crazy production in the college levels that could translate well to the pros. Oregon edge rusher DJ Johnson is the next guy that Atlanta brought in for a pre-draft visit, along with Cameron Young out of Mississippi State, defensive lineman. So these 2 players are some mid-round picks right now, early day 3, late day 2 targets. Texas linebacker DeMarvion Overshown is the next player. That is straight out of a Key and Peele skit. So for that reason alone, I am in. One of my favorite players in this draft class is safety Jamie Robinson out of Florida State. He's a ball hawk, and he is a vicious run tackler as well. Another safety Atlanta checked out, Sidney Brown out of Illinois. I think Atlanta is just trying to tighten up their secondary, and what a good time to do that with not a ton of great quarterbacks in the NFC South, so a good secondary could really take over a game. Here's how Sidney Brown and Jamie Robinson stack up against one another last year. Robinson is my number 1 day 2, early day 3 draft target for really all 32 teams. I'm just crazy about him as a player. Wherever he ends up, I think he'll be successful. Some other virtual meetings they had and other visits, private workout with Cam Smith along with Justin Marshall, then a Zoom meeting with Zach Kuntz and BJ Wilson along with, get my arm out of the way, Arkansas wide receiver Jaden Hazelwood. So those are some other visits to keep an eye on. I am intrigued by one of them though. That is cornerback Cam Smith out of South Carolina. He has excellent size for a DB. If you've watched our previous episodes, you know that I think people probably make too much out of 40-yard dashes or quarterback hand size. Those types of measurements get, I don't know, maybe exaggerated a little bit in terms of how important they are. But if there is one measurement from the combine that you should look for, it is height and wingspan for cornerbacks. Because an extra half an inch, quarter of an inch, that is the difference between pregnancy or also a pass breakup. So Cam Smith could be a name to keep an eye on for the Atlanta Falcons out of USC. So name a draft sleeper you love. This is your opportunity to be the GM here. Let me know who you just think is a can't-miss guy in day 3 or late day 2 of this year's draft.